Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Illinois Latino News Opinion Plus, a monthly series airing on Fridays. This is a space for our opinions where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community is curious about. My name is Nadia Carolina Hernandez, reporter of Illinois Latino News. Today, we are joined by Katrina Phidd, the communications director of Chicago Votes. Welcome, Katrina. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Illinois Latino News Opinion Plus. So we're going to today be primarily talking about our upcoming election here in Chicago for our mayor. So I guess let's talk about first, what is Chicago Votes and what do they do for Chicagoans, and why is an organization like this important?
Non-partisan organization working in the city, mobilizing young people to become civically active, and voting is a huge part of that. So we don't endorse candidates. We don't identify with a particular political party. We're focused on educating young people, breaking down barriers to civic engagement, and making democracy and civics a space where young people feel comfortable and heard.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear, especially because the youth vote is so important and most of the time kind of underrated. So there have been a couple of mayoral forums, and also I think we just had a debate go on last month. So what are the big issues for the 2023 mayoral election? What are people primarily interested in or concerned about?
Yeah, there's a number of issues that have been elevated by the mayoral candidates. However, the issues that are important are whatever issues that are impacting us as community members, as constituents in Chicago. So if it's an issue that is impacting you and your community, it's something that should be relevant and should be on the minds of mayoral candidates. But some of the big talking points have been around public safety, specifically policing, and crime in the city. And then another huge thing right now is public transportation. So a lot of people rely on public transportation in Chicago, and people who ride it regularly have noticed that it's not running regularly, it's filthy, and it's just not a comfortable space to be in. So that's a huge issue. Housing and the displacement of Chicagoans is another huge issue. And then the environment as well. So there's kind of buckets in things that touch every aspect of people's lives.
Yeah, and so going into some of the candidates, there's a really big diverse pool. We have about, I want to say 9 candidates running for mayor, which is huge. So can you kind of give us a breakdown of who is running, how many people, and especially how many Latinos are running for mayor?
Yeah, so there are 9 candidates running. We have Mayor Lori Lightfoot, the incumbent, seeking re-election, and then she's running against eight people. Of everybody running, 7 out of the 9 candidates are Black. 1 is a white man, Paul Vallas, and then the last, Chuy Garcia, is Latino. So that's kind of the demographic pool. We have a couple of women, Lori Lightfoot, Alderwoman Sophia King. We have the youngest candidate is Jamal Green, in his late 20s. We have Willie Wilson, a businessman. We have Brandon Johnson, who's a former teacher and Cook County Commissioner. There is State Representative Cam Buckner. There's Alderman Roderick Sawyer. Trying to make sure I haven't forgotten anybody's names. But yeah, there's 9 candidates. 7 out of the 9 are Black, and 1 identifies as Latino.
Yeah, especially that's a huge diverse group of people, and there's so much going on about how that huge number could affect whether we'll even get to know on the day of the election if we get a mayor, and that could be a possible runoff.
Yeah, it's very likely that there will be a runoff. So that is something that Chicago voters should be preparing for, is that we most likely will not know the mayor after the election on February 28th, and it will go into a runoff on April 4th. And that's because a candidate needs to receive at least 50%, and with 9 candidates, that's kind of a tough situation.
Yeah, and especially because our last runoff, or not our last runoff, our last mayoral election ended up in a runoff as well. So we can kind of see history repeat itself. So we are kind of going off of last year. We had the Illinois midterms, the national midterms. We also are going 2 years out from the 2020 presidential election. So there's a huge amount of elections going on, obviously at the federal level, the state level, but now we're getting really hyper local with our city, with with our alderman and our mayor. So can you kind of talk a little bit about the importance to encourage people to vote in their local elections as well as the national elections?
Yeah, so during the municipal elections this year, Chicagoans are going to be voting on the mayor, alderman, police district councils, city clerk, and city treasurer. And police district councils is a new position, so that's something that people should look into. The Chicago Reader has a great voter guide on that as well. But the reason that municipal elections are so important is exactly because it is local elections. And these are the elections that impact us the most. We see the impact on our day-to-day lives. A lot of us ride the train, so we're going to see the impact of the mayor's policies on public transportation when we ride the train. When we go downtown, are there police everywhere? Are young people forced to obey a curfew? These are things that impact our lives every single day. And these elections, a lot of times, do come down to smaller numbers of voters. So you do see the impact of your vote on a larger scale sometimes.
Yeah, I really liked how you kind of tied it into this idea that we're going to feel that impact more. We're going to feel these policies affect us more. Not to say that federal ones aren't important, but we're going to be interacting with these decisions on a daily basis. And so earlier you kind of mentioned about how Chicago Votes focuses on young voters and mobilizing young voters. How many young people are eligible to vote in Chicago right now?
It's tough to get that exact number because young people are a super transient population. We're moving around a lot. There's a number of college students who may not be technically Illinois residents, but are eligible to vote in Illinois now. So the things to note are young people make up the largest chunk of the electorate. So technically we have the most power. We have power in numbers. And if young people showed out to vote at really high rates, we would have a huge amount of control over the election. Another thing to note is you are eligible to vote in Illinois if you are over 18, a U.S. citizen, and if you've lived in Illinois or Chicago specifically for the past 30 days. So if you're new in town, if you're here in school, living in a dorm, and you've been here for 30 days, you can vote in Chicago.
Yeah, that's really interesting to know, especially because schools and universities might have a lot of out-of-state students, and they might be living here for the next couple of years, so they're going to want to get involved preferably sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of discussed this a little bit, but why is it important for young people? And if you could specify who young people kind of includes, because to me that could be anyone like in their college, but obviously I know that spans a little older, to care about the mayor or their alderman. And if you can kind of also go into what is an alderman, because that might be an unfamiliar term for people who aren't city folk.
Yeah. So the first part of your question was, sorry, can you repeat the first part?
Yeah, if you can kind of talk a little bit about who is considered like a young voter.
Okay, yeah. So Chicago Votes qualifies young people as people in the electorate, like technically 17 to 35. In Illinois, you can register to vote when you're 17 if you're going to be 18 by the primary. So there's like some tricky like cutoffs there. But technically, it's basically like spanning your 20s and into your mid 30s as young people in Chicago. And then in terms of mayor and alderman, so the mayor is basically like, if you're thinking about it, it's like the president of the city. So they're kind of like the head of the city. Then you have your aldermen, and Chicago is divided into 50 legislative districts called wards, which is probably something you've heard. Is your like what ward you live in? So that would determine who your alderperson is, and that person is represented, elected to represent the interests of your ward, your community. And all 50 aldermen come together to make up city council. So city council is in charge of passing ordinances, and basically passing the policies and laws in the city. And then the mayor is kind of the head of that, in control of that as well.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, if I were to compare it, it's kind of like the House of Representatives, or even like better, the Senate, because there's an equal amount of people, and then being able to have those decisions. Can you kind of talk a little bit about, as a follow-up question, what kind of decisions are city council involved in? What could you expect to happen, or what can people expect city council members to discuss?
Yeah, so city council discusses any issue that specifically impacts Chicago and covers Chicago. So recently, some of the things city council has been dealing with is we've had an influx of migrants coming in that are being bussed in from different parts of the country. So city council would be in charge of figuring out the city's response to that. Are we going to become a sanctuary city, which Chicago is? So that's something Chicago figures out. Another thing is like school funding. The mayor, for example, is in charge of the budget for the entire city. So how much funding goes to police, how much funding goes to our schools, how much funding goes to streets and sanitation. That is being impacted, that is being voted on by city council and the mayor. So basically, like everything, if I can put it simply, yeah.
Yeah, they're huge jobs, and what I'm hearing is also that they're really important. So being able to care and have a voice in that is really important. So I guess to kind of start wrapping things up, you kind of mentioned this already, but how can people register to vote in Chicago and in Illinois? Where do they have to go? How can they go online? If you can describe that process a little bit.
Yeah, so thankfully Illinois has some really good voting laws, so it's relatively simple and easy to register to vote in Illinois. You can do it online. The deadline to register to vote online is, I believe, February 23rd, but I would double check, and that's at chicagoelections.gov. That's where you can register to vote. You can check your voter registration status and check your polling place location. You can download the paper form if you want to fill out the voter registration form on paper. But then you can also register to vote at your polling place. So there's no end cutoff to registering to vote. You can register to vote on election day. You can wait until February 28th and register at the local polling place. You can do it at any early voting location. You just need 2 forms of ID, and one would need to have your current address. And neither of those IDs need to be an Illinois state ID.
That's awesome to hear. Well, that's all the time we have today. So thank you for talking with us, and thank you for being a guest on Illinois Latino News Opinion Plus.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Join us next time for another episode. For more information about our discussion today, check out our web story on ILLatinonews.com and follow us on Twitter at ILLatinonews. I'm Nadia Carolina Hernandez with Illinois Latino News Opinion Plus. See you next time.